I do remember a vision where there was maybe 7 beings around a baby, and they had a light and they put it inside the baby.
You said that someone was trying to stop you from coming. Do you know who that was and why?
There are beings that feed on emotions.
I am here with Laura Mulroney. You mentioned that your story goes a ways back into your childhood. So maybe we could start with how these spiritual experiences occurred in your life.
I don't have many memories before I was 4 years old. I think I sprained my ankle, and that's pretty much when I feel like I came into being. But I do remember thinking I could talk to animals. As I got older, I think I just probably played that off as a childhood fantasy or something. I don't know. Nothing happened until I was about 7. My mom had moved us from New Jersey to Arkansas. She had become a Jehovah's Witness, so I was raised a Jehovah's Witness. But one time I had a dream when I was 7, and in the dream I was riding on horseback to my friend's house, which wasn't an unusual thing. And I came up to this fence, and there were wolves on the other side of it. And I heard a voice, and he said, "Laura, where are you going?" And I always remembered that voice because it was so like loud in my head that even as a child, I remembered it. I had had dreams as a child of being in Nazi Germany. One dream, and I remember I was told to sit there and look pretty. And I was just a little girl. And as I got older and I was realizing that this was just a little girl that had that dream. Um, so those were kind of the early years. My first NDE or death-like experience, I was married, probably the first year and a half of my marriage. We had fallen asleep and his arm was around my shoulders, and somehow he turned over and he got me in a chokehold. He was asleep. He was out meaning to do this. And I must have been struggling to get air. And as I opened my eyes, I saw a spirit on top of me, just like right over my throat area. It's just a little, not huge. And then I saw coming out of the corner of the room what I would have thought was an angel. And he flew in and he yelled, "She's chosen." And he knocked this spirit off of me. They went to the ground, they disappeared. I went back to sleep. And I had thought, because I was getting ready to get baptized, that, that was Jehovah protecting me. I wasn't always a Jehovah's Witness because I left it when I was a teenager, but I went back to it after I got married to a very Catholic husband. He probably didn't appreciate that part very much, but I went on. I made a lot of poor choices. I married very young, too young. I was not mature at all. So that marriage, it fell apart. I had left him twice. And the first time I left him, I took the children with me out of state, and he immediately got custody of the kids. Then the second time I left him, I knew that I could not bring the kids with me. And so that was probably, it was the biggest mistake that I've ever made in my life. I can't fix it, but I do know that the events that transpired as my life went along, that it was probably the way it was supposed to happen. Or we could look at it that I took a path that needed. Years later, I was living in Idaho. I had met a man that at first I wanted nothing to do with him. And he kind of wore me down. And so then we had gotten together. At one point we broke up and I moved to Oregon, and he followed me. And then his grandparents gifted him a house. So we had to go back to Idaho. And the day that we went to look at the house, I had such a fear and foreboding that overcame me that I could never explain. I remembered it, but we lived there for I think 3 years and nothing traumatic happened until it did. And so that is the really quick part of what happened. There's a lot of nuances within that were not necessarily spiritual experiences. I have my oldest sister Irene, who she died September 15th, 2001. It was a fight between her and her husband, I suppose. But she had come to visit us. And I always kind of felt like my sister was this free spirit. She just went wherever the wind took her. And when she came to visit us, it was when we were on a split. And she saw us together and she's like, "You two are going to get back together. Don't worry about it." She told me, "You need to be nice to him, though. You pick on him too much." And for the first time when my sister left, I cried. I'd never cried when she left before. She'd been coming and going in and out of my life since we were kids. She was 5 years older than me, so she was, the first one that left the house of the sisters. And that particular time, and then I received a letter from her years later. And when I got the letter, I was reading it at the kitchen counter and I dropped it. And it was like my hands just went like this. She had gotten married. And I knew that was going to be the end of her. And the only way I think I know that is because of the beings that were with me my whole life. They gave me these feelings, thoughts. Before I was clairaudient, I would have a thought, and the thought would be so left field that it made me, kind of like, where'd that come from? And then years later, the thought became a voice. And when the thought became a voice, I was able to get past and learn what it was that had actually happened to me. But that wasn't until the events of 2002 when we were living in that house and I was at work. Um, I had been very traumatized by my sister's death. And she, I felt like she gave me gifts, like she passed a torch to me, because that was kind of when it seemed to me that my experiences started really leveling up, but I still didn't know what it was. One day I was at work and my ex had called me and he told me that he had bought some meth. And I told him to get rid of it. I wanted nothing to do with it. This was the second time I had told him to get rid of it, that, this is what killed my sister. I want nothing to do with it. And so this particular time I said to him, just wait till I get home. And so that was, I believe, in April of 2002. Within a couple of months, my nephew had moved in with us, my sister's son. He's an adult. He had, his girlfriend, and I think he just needed to be close to family at that time. But we were doing meth, and so he left because it was getting pretty hot. My ex had become the dealer because he had to be able to make money at what he was doing with this. I ended up quitting my job. I was an assistant manager with a corporation and I was in line for my own store. And I knew I was going to get fired. I mean, it was painfully obvious that I was doing drugs. And then about the time that I quit working was about the time that the voices started. There were many playful voices. There were a couple that stood out. The day that I heard him say, "This is not the life I chose for you." And that was the voice of when I was 7 years old. And I remembered that voice. And I paid attention to that. I didn't leave the situation yet, but I did pay attention to that. And then the other voice that I heard, he said, I don't want to watch you die. And that was the one that came flying through and said she's chosen and knocked that spirit off of me when I was in my 20s. So after that, if you didn't have telepathy, you probably weren't talking to me. I withdrew from everybody. I had what I would probably call a dark night of the soul. I literally felt my brain just like crack. Like I could not hold myself together. And they were the ones that got me out of that. It was definitely a rescue mission. There were lots of voices, lots of visions. And a lot of people would say, oh, well, you were high. But I'm not high and haven't been high in 20 years. And I still have visions. So, and I still have voices, thankfully. They're kind and they're helpful. They got me out of that situation. At one point when I was in Idaho, the one that said, this is not the life I chose for you, he basically threatened the person that was in charge of me, is what it sounded like. He said, I'll come back next June and she better be off drugs or we're done. I was given an exit point and I said, I want to stay. I want to learn. And sometimes I regret that, but sometimes I'm really happy with that. I was very blessed and protected, and a lot of things that happened in my life, from putting myself in bad situations, almost getting raped, they protected me, even when I didn't know they were there. And so then I got out, and it was probably 4 days after I broke my nose, or he broke my nose. I had called my mother and I was screaming on the phone to my mother to get me out of there. And I told her it was drugs. And she got me out of there, but she sent me to my sister's house. She wasn't going to take me to her house. So I went on a bus trip with my son all the way across country. And I could definitely say it was the worst trip of my life. And that was how I got out of Idaho. Now, at this point, they're not talking through me yet. I'm struggling with what happened. I'm crying all the time because I wanted my life back. My ex had basically ducked out of the relationship about the time that I said that I felt my brain crack, because he wasn't going to have a girlfriend that was schizophrenic or nuts, and he was high himself. He told me later that he did not remember much of what happened during that time, but he has spent most of his life in and out of jail. The last time I checked, he was in for a couple more years. So yeah. So then I went to my sister's house. I went then I went to my dad's house and I got a job in Florida. I was going through all the motions, but I wasn't okay. And I cried all the time. I did not want to be in Florida. So I decided I was going to go get my life back in Idaho. There was one incident with my dad that is probably pretty important. When he heard that I was hearing voices, he pulled me aside and he said, Laura Lee, are you talking to dead people? And I'm like, well, but if they help save my life, doesn't that make them, good? They're not evil. And it made him remember a time when he was 16 years old and he was raised in New York City. He said he went and he opened his curtains and the whole city was pink. It was this most beautiful pink he'd ever seen. And then he went back and he laid down. And then he said, that's not right. And he got up and everything was shrouded in darkness again. But I kind of wonder if that was when I chose my dad, because both my mom and dad, they're so different. My mom was a Jehovah's Witness, devout, and my dad, he was a greaser from the 50s. And he never like got away from that. He was always listening to doo-wop, and he liked to do drugs, and my mom didn't even drink, that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
But they divorced when I was 4. So I kind of went back and forth between them until I got married. So, okay, sorry.
No, you're fine.
Then I take my son, we go back to Idaho, and I stayed with a friend of mine. I was trying to win back the husband, but I found out that he had gotten married, the ex-boyfriend, and that he had gotten married while I was away. So I left. I went to my nephew who was in Oregon, and then I've been in Oregon since. I've left a couple of times for family, but I always come back. So I was in Oregon and I was living with my nephew. It was a year and a half later, I think. Anyway, I was getting beaten up by the voices I was hearing. You have to do this, you have to do this. You're the chosen one. And so at one point they had me standing all night long because the chosen have to stand for something. I was just like, I'm going to bed. You guys are in my bedroom. I'm going to sleep. And I laid down and I'm crying and I'm rocking back and forth like this. And my hand starts to do this. And I hear a voice. He's patting my shoulder and he said, "It's okay. I think we found a way." And when I woke up, woke up, here I am again. And I don't even remember exactly when it happened, but I started speaking in a different language. It was definitely the day that had happened. And I just like kind of grabbed my mouth because it came out. And then, so now I'm speaking in tongues. I know how to reference this because, they did it in the Bible. Uh, I remember when I had called my mom and I had told her that, I'm not saying that it was angels that saved me, but somebody saved me. And she said, "Oh, Laura Lee, angels are too busy doing God's work to be worried about us." And that was the moment I was like, that's the woman who raised me. She taught me nothing. And I realized through my guides how wrong I was, how even though if I wasn't practicing Jehovah's Witness, I still believed it, still believed that this God of love was going to kill anybody who wasn't a Jehovah's Witness or wasn't walking that path the way they should be. So, I grew up with Armageddon around every single corner. And it was kind of hard to put that away. Pretty much I would tell anybody that would listen. I was seeking answers. I moved to a place that's a small town. A lot of people are gifted here, but I couldn't quite fit in because the beings that were with me were so strong that it scared people. They've tampered down quite a bit, but I'll give you an example. I was out at a club bar with this girl that I knew, and we were joking. And at one point, I made a little innuendo that was probably questionable. And she looked at me and she said, "Laura, you knocked that off." And she grabbed her mouth and she said, "You make them stop that. They are not allowed to do that." Because they spoke through her. Something she would never have said was knock it off. I wrote down a lot of the things over those couple of years that happened. And then life just kind of sort of went on. People that I talked to, you could see it in their eyes. There's be a little, just like a little shudder that would be like, "Okay, I'm not listening to you. I can't." They're not ready for it. So I lived that way for 20 years. Some people knew that I could do that, but I didn't really do it often. I've done it a couple of times for some people. I remember a group that I joined that was a spiritual group, and they were talking about how they'd had their life saved. And so I went in and And this time it's not video, it's just typing. And I got accused of lying that, we're serious in this group. And that hurt a lot. And I think it was one of the most formative times for me to realize that it wasn't time. So I go on with my life. They're helping me in ways that I can't even express. They were helping me grow as a person, um, helping me to see errors in my thought processes. Jehovah's Witnesses, they're pacifists. And just one time I was just sinking deep in thought, contemplating that I was a pacifist. And what he said was, Laura, 10 million Jews would disagree with you. And I was like, now I get it. Sometimes war has to happen. But it was things like that to make me challenge my belief system. And they were really, really beneficial in that way.
Thank you for sharing everything that you've shared. It sounds like you've had quite an interesting journey with being able to hear from these beings. Is there a word that you call them? Like, would you say that they're your guides or angels?
Interesting story was back in Idaho, right before I had started hearing the voices, I had been sleeping. I was deep in this dream. And in the dream, it was like ancient times. Everybody was like in fur coat, kind of, that type of ancient time. And I looked across this crowded marketplace and there was a boy, and I can still see him in my mind's eye, dark curly hair, probably about 13, 14. And he looks at me and his lips aren't moving. And he said, we're here to save you. You're in danger. He said, you're the queen. And then all of a sudden, all of this commotion happens. And I get picked up by this guy on a horse and dragged into the woods. And then now I'm not in the woods anymore. Now I'm running, and I'm running next to the boy who was in the wood, in the marketplace. But he's older. I'm older. It's a beautiful mountain top, green hill. There's a pathway that leads up to a tree, and we're running through that. And he goes on one path, I go on the other. And he says, I know who you are. You're the keeper of names. Then I start hearing the trees. It was weird. I know. They were like humming the theme song to Green Acres, and then it was pounding. And then there was a shot, and then I woke up with the worst migraine I'd ever had in my life. But I remembered that particular dream. So I would ask them their names, and I had a book and I have all these names. Anytime I ask them where they're from, I get the light. We're from the light. And they're such gentle souls and kind. If I, go off, I manage a grocery store. So over COVID, there was a lot of unprocessed emotions that I had to deal with. And they would talk me through these things. And very, very helpful, very protective. They'll sing through me when I'm driving. And sometimes, actually, the way it happens is if I'm going to be channeling a higher message, they start singing, and then the the being comes in that will give me food for thought. I'll be told things like, don't carry the burdens of this life into the next. That was one that really, really stuck out.
You think that dream was from a past life?
It could be. I've had lots of past life dreams since. I know that I was a Tibetan monk at least twice. I've been given visions that I was never sure how I felt about past lives. I didn't believe in them before. So a lot of the dreams that I've had where I'm in with a group of people and I know who they are, that particular dream, I think it was them letting me know they were coming to get me out.
Interesting. Okay, so we talked about your near-death experience that you had when you were accidentally choked in your sleep. Was there another near-death experience?
There was trying to remember if there was one or two more. I had written them down. When I was in Idaho, I was blank. I was just like in this darkness and I heard a voice and he was saying, Laura, Laura, where are you? Laura, I can't find you. And I opened my eyes, no thoughts. I'm there. I opened my eyes and I looked around the room and nobody's there. And he said, there you are. I found you. How did he say it? I got you into this and I will get you out. I never understood exactly what that meant. I thought perhaps he was one of the ones that had me come here. I do believe that I was sent on a mission. I did not know what that mission was. And they kept saying it's because she doesn't remember who she is. I've gotten a little bit more intel on that. I remember once there was a one of the ladies that was speaking because I hear both male and female. And she says she was a baby when it happened. That's why she can't remember. I do remember a vision where there was maybe 7 beings around a baby and they had a light and they put it inside the baby. And then each of those beings kissed the top of the baby's head. That was probably my first intro to what I would think was a past life or a life being putting the energy of the soul into the baby. I don't know.
Interesting. So, you know that you were sent here on a mission, but do you still not remember what the details of that was, or have you been given some more information?
I have been given more information just recently, actually. I was a jumper. I kept trying to figure out what that was because the lady I heard, she said, why don't you just jump? And so now it's literally like 18 years from the time I heard her say that. And I had completely forgotten about it. I was I was traveling in this dream and I had a couple of dreams that led up to it. I was part of a resistance. And in order to get here, I had to go through dimensions. And they called me a ship jumper because I was able to hide it from the ones that were trying to stop us from coming. So then that dream they had said about jumping ships. And then another one, I was literally on a plane. My sister was there and I said, but one of us isn't going to make it. And then my sister disappeared. But I had these children that I was hiding to get onto the earth to protect them from something. That's probably about all I know as far as that goes.
Okay. You said that someone was trying to stop you from coming. Do you know who that was and why?
I think they like the earth the way it is because it's such a playground of emotions. There are beings that feed on emotions. And when we, run with our mind a little bit, they love that. You know, I always have a fear that something bad is going to happen. Oh, don't do that. You'll get hurt. Do it the right way. Because I can always see these, stupid accidents that can happen. And I'm always trying to protect people. I think that's it. I don't think that they particularly care the damage that they've done or are doing. And I know that part of what we're supposed to do is to let go of all that baggage and be our best selves. We're all going to make mistakes. Not a single one of us has not made a mistake or said something in a conversation that they don't just replay over and over in their minds. It's recognizing that and pulling back, ending that cycle. I used to say that the mind was like a naughty child. You have to keep reeling it back in. For a long time, I felt like I had a hold of that. And just recently, I'm realizing that I need to work on that some more.
Mm. It's an ongoing process.
It is. It is. It definitely comes in cycles.
Mhm. What it sounds like I hear you saying is that maybe there's some beings who are feeding on our negative mindsets and like
Absolutely.
negative thoughts and emotions. And then there's beings like you and others who are coming here to help transmute some of that.
Yes. And so in November, I wasn't in a good headspace. I think that, a lot of us that had been on the front lines having to deal with everything during the whole COVID thing, I think that we kind of were going through our processes because, suddenly it hit rock bottom and now we can pick up the pieces. Well, I heard him say, I've never seen her this way before. I was more quiet in my mind. And then I woke up one day and I went, I'm depressed. This is what depression feels like.
Mhm.
And so I had decided right then and there, I'm going to turn this around. I'm not going to sit in this. I'm going to keep going. And I had said to them, you gave me all of these gifts. I don't know what to do with them. I can't help anybody because nobody wants to hear this. And I had stopped worrying. Again, small town, didn't have a lot of resources. So I decided I was going to start meditating again. And I went to a YouTube channel that I knew was good for this. And I started following the meditations. And then I started watching some tarot readers, which I have never done before. And I found this one who's actually phenomenal. Hey, Casey. She was right on. Everything she was saying that it's time, it's time for you to do this, it's time for you to do this. So I took a course in pranic healing and sound therapy. So I wanted to integrate some of that into what I do on my days off. Uh, I wanted to be able to help people, and that to me was the only way I could do it. So I'm watching YouTube. I've never really watched YouTube before. I bought the subscription, the whole thing. And I'm listening to videos, more uplifting. I'm feeling better. My life is changing in a more positive way. I feel more centered. And this one show kept coming on and I kept flipping it off. I'm like, I don't want to watch a podcast. I don't want to watch a podcast. And one day it came on and it caught my attention. And it was Next Level Soul. And I went, that's me. That's my story. That's how this happened. Not my story, but that's how it happened. I went through this extreme dark night of the soul. I did go through about a year of life review in dream work. And I remember the first time it happened, of course, I had no idea what any of this was. I was able to Google it. I remember the very first time he brings me into this room and there is my ex-husband and his family. And I'm backing away. I'm like, no, 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 I can't do this. I can't do this. Don't make me do this. So I didn't yet. Eventually I had to have the interaction, maybe not in this dimension, but in higher dimensions. I would like to think that maybe in this life they don't understand why I made the choices I made because I also don't understand the choices that I made. I know that they were coming from a very immature place, but I'd like to think that their higher selves understand. And my ex-husband, he forgave me for that. So, we all made mistakes. He had said he wasn't perfect in the relationship. So
I remember you saying something about a soul transference. Have you shared about that one yet?
I have not. I started where I was leaving my body, out of body experiences, and I was doing it spontaneously. I could be in bed and have my eyes closed and be awake, and I could remote view. But several times I jumped into somebody and I could see what they were doing. One example was I jumped into a person who was working a drive-through window, and I could see their hands, and at the time I know what they're doing, why they're doing. I can feel them. Of course, I didn't appreciate doing that to people who didn't know it was happening. At one point, I left the planet quite a bit. And I know it sounds very strange, but one of the last times that I was able to do it on purpose, I went all the way up into the atmosphere and I got pulled back down and my feet pretty much nailed to the earth. It's like, this is where you need to be. But that was when I started having issues with my feet, my legs. So I haven't really done that a lot over the past few years. I've just been pretty much busy trying to, live this life and make the best choices I can make at this time. There was one thing that I promised them that I would share, and that is, as humans, we are extremely full of fear. We don't understand something, so especially when it's from the other side, we will automatically think it's evil, push it away, we'll sage it away, we'll ban them from being around us. And sometimes we're sending away the wrong ones. Evil is not how somebody looks. It is what they do. It's what they choose to do. I, a long time ago, opened my house for them. I'm like, I'm here for you guys. As long as you're nice, you can stay. And pretty much my guardians, they kind of monitor the door, as it were. But one time I was walking on the beach and I heard a little girl crying. And, I knew it wasn't a little girl. I telepathically asked, what's wrong? She said, they said I'm evil. They sent me away. They said I don't love the light. She goes, I love the light. I love the light. And so I'm like, why don't you come stay with me? And she's a little fairy. Her name's Poppy. She's never caused a second of trouble. The last time I heard her voice, she was showing someone around. They came to visit. So pretty much that's how my life has been. It's beautiful.
Laura, thank you so much for being willing to share your story.
Thank you.
Do you have any links that you would like me to share with the viewers, or are you more of a private person?
I am pretty private. I did put up a website. It is the singinglotus.com.
I will put that in the description so people can check that out. Thank you so much. I've really enjoyed this conversation.
I have too. Thank you.
Thank you for watching the Love Covered Life podcast. Don't forget to subscribe and comment with your thoughts and opinions, and check the description box for the links to my free community where I share lots of resources, my Pay What You Can community where we do classes and challenges together, my TikTok, Instagram, my Clips channel, and lovecoveredlife.com where I share my paintings. Thank you so much for your support.